If this video could only be 10 seconds long, I would tell you to always... Hey everyone, welcome to the acceleration video part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, I posted it last week. You should definitely check that out first because a lot of the things I talk about in that video get brought up again here, but with a lot less detail. In that video, we talked a lot about biomechanics and exercises and different things you can do to make your body better at accelerating. In this video, I'm going to talk more specifically about the technique for a block start. Some of it applies if you're a field sport athlete, but I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about starting blocks. There are two things I'm really going to cover in this video. One is the block setup, and the other thing is the block technique. Now, the block technique does also apply if you're using a 2-point start, but some of the angles are going to be different. But the same principle applies about how to push off of your feet and where you're trying to set up your momentum. Now, the most important thing when you're setting up your blocks is where you put the pedals. And that can be really difficult for a lot of people. They try things that feel comfortable or that feel, easy, but what's easy or what is right is two completely different things. I'm not going to claim to be the #1 expert in the world on this, but there is some very legitimate research done into how we can get the best leverage out of our muscles. And so you do want to set your legs up at some pretty consistent angles that we have studied and that we've seen. I'll give you what I use and the rationale behind them. Our #1 goal when setting up the blocks is to get your legs in favorable positions. So you want a really good zigzag pattern in your legs. You want your ankle at 90 degrees, you want your knee around 90 degrees. Those aren't the exact angles, but the point we're getting at is we want our muscles in the strongest possible positions. And I talked a little bit about this last week, but basically, our muscles are stronger depending on how far they've been stretched or how much they've been contracted. And so we want to get to about the middle of the muscle every single time. This might be a really small amount of time, but you don't want to wait 1/10, 2/10 of a second for your muscles to be contracted to a place where they can produce the most amount of force. You want them at the point where they can produce force right away. So when you get to your set position, you want to be set where your muscles are the strongest. Before you even set up your blocks, most people are going to have a dominant foot that they prefer. A great way to find out which foot should be in front is to fall forward, and whichever foot you naturally catch yourself with is going to be your lead foot. And you can do this a couple of times, and you'll naturally gravitate towards one. Like even for me, having played soccer and growing up using both feet, I still naturally prefer my left to some degree. A really great starting point for your block setup is going to be one foot in front of the other, 2 steps to your lead foot, and then 1 more step, so a total of 3 steps on the other side. That should get you pretty close, and then you can kind of mess with it from there. Some people then start to measure by using 1, 2, 3 fingers after, or pulling it in a little bit. A lot of people really stress about this peg back here. You're almost always going to be on the bottom one. And you might ask yourself, well, if I know the exact measurement, shouldn't I try and do it with like a ruler? You can do this, but it just kind of becomes one more thing you have to carry around. And if you measure it out in your feet, you're always going to have that unit of measurement when you set up your blocks. I don't recommend using the numbers on the blocks because those change from block to block. So if you're at an away meet and you didn't bring your own blocks to set up, you're going to be looking at all the numbers and you're going to have to try and figure out, which line is this, which mark is this. But if you're using your feet, that's always going to be the same setup no matter what. When it comes to the technique of actually starting, I'm not going to harp on a lot of the things that I did in the last video. I talked a lot about hinging over the ball of your foot. When you're recording this, it should be very easy to see. If you're hinging over your foot, you'll see a little bit of a snap. See your toes stay the same while the rest of your foot moves. Knee is going to be dropping down. Your shins will be pointed at a very low angle. Your shin angle is almost 1-for-1 going to be the angle that your center of gravity moves at. So whatever angle your torso is at, it's good if your shins are completely in line. And I don't stress too much about shin angles because that's something that I believe comes naturally. If you're producing a lot of force, you're going to be able to get out further and get out lower. If you try to teach yourself to have low shin angles, you might end up falling a lot and just scratching up your face and your hands on the track all the time. It's okay if your technique changes a little bit throughout the years, but you want to have a really solid foundation of pushing out horizontally as best as you can. If this video could only be 10 seconds long, I would tell you to always, always, always push off of 2 feet. I have routinely heard coaches tell their athletes to think about pushing off of 1 foot, and this is a terrible idea. The rationale behind this is that you can get your first foot on the ground as fast as possible, but there's two problems with that. One is that when you just get your foot out in front of you, you usually overreach, and then you just have to wait for your center of gravity to catch up anyways, and you've just wasted however much time your foot was on the ground. The second is that your foot doesn't count. When you're crossing the finish line, they measure based on your chest. Because we're worried about our chest crossing the finish line, that's also the thing that we're focused on accelerating. We're focused on accelerating through our center of mass. It's gonna sound like I'm talking down to you here, but I promise some people need to hear this. So when you're pushing off of 2 feet, this is gonna sound annoying, but when you push off of 2 feet, you're twice as strong as when you push off of 1 foot. Technically, this isn't true because there's something called the bilateral deficit, which is that you're stronger in a single leg squat than you are in a double leg squat when you just double the single leg squat. But more importantly, it's because you don't have to push just as hard with both legs. Your back leg in the blocks is probably not going to push at 100% as hard as you can, but you might push at 90% to really get yourself out and get your center of gravity ahead of your front foot. This might sound very obvious, but when you push against the blocks are gonna push you forward. When you just pull your leg forward, you're not actually going anywhere. And I can't stress enough how obvious this should be, but I still hear people getting this wrong. And if you think I am making this up, here's what I want you to do. I want you to jump off of one leg by just lifting your knee as fast as you can. It is impossible because you're not actually going anywhere. And when we look at the first step of our acceleration, it's almost exactly the same as a vertical jump. So real quick, I'm gonna break down some acceleration footage. I'm gonna break down a clip and you're gonna see exactly what I'm talking about. So this first clip really shows pushing off of both feet. You can see that I'm pushing off of both feet start going back, but I'm not pushing as hard off of my right foot. It does still come off the block pedal first. That's totally okay. And here in this clip, I think being barefoot is as much as it's uncomfortable to see my feet, it really does help when you look at how the foot is hinging. Even here when I've got weights and it makes it more difficult, I'm still able to get a lot of torque out of that foot. The knee is dropping, and all of that is because I'm getting onto the ball of my foot before I explode off. And we'll see one more. This really helps to keep those shins in line. Perfect. Thank you for watching the video. And if you don't mind, go ahead, like, subscribe, do all those things that help the YouTube algorithm, share the video. Even if you just click the link to share it and don't send it to anyone, it still helps out my channel and I really appreciate that. And if you like this video, there's plenty more where that came from on the rest of my channel.